everybody. Welcome back to Ghosts of West Virginia. Ghost Stories of West Virginia. Okay, we're on part 2. This is Jefferson County Courthouse. Now, the Jefferson County Courthouse, located at 100 East Washington Street, is said to hold many phantom residues of the past, including that of the trial of the famous abolitionist John Brown. After Charlestown became the county seat of the new Jefferson County in 1801, the courthouse was the first public building to be opened on the square in 1803. Now, the building soon proved to be too small and was replaced by a larger one in 1836. Although the structure today is a different one still, the trauma and emotions associated with the events that took place in the courthouse apparently have lodged into psychic space here and perhaps even into the land itself. Now, in 1859, the courthouse was the venue of the trial of John Brown, for which the city remains famous. Brown's attempt to take control of the federal armory in Harper's Ferry ended in a disaster for him. Among the dead were 10 of his raiders, including his sons Oliver and Watson, and Brown himself was wounded. He and 6 of his men were captured, arrested, and sent to Charlestown to stand trial. They were arraigned on charges of treason against Virginia, inciting slaves to rebellion and murder. Brown declared, "If you want my blood, you can have it at any moment, without this mockery of a trial." The judge stated that Brown would be tried first, starting October 26. Now, Brown asked for a delay because of his wound, but on October 27th, the doctor found him fit to stand trial and proceedings continued. Throughout the trial, Brown was carried into the courtroom on a stretcher and lay on a cot unless he was compelled to rise. Brown pleaded not guilty to the charges. His attorneys considered a plea of insanity, and some abolitionists pushed for it, hoping that it would lighten Brown's sentence. Brown rejected the idea and took a stoic stance that turned him into a martyr. The trial was a huge spectacle, and people poured into Charlestown for a chance to witness it. The courtroom was packed daily with about 600 people, while a crowd milled about outside, waiting to catch word of the trial. Inside, the atmosphere was circus-like. Spectators ate peanuts and tossed the shells, smoked cigars, and spat chewing tobacco. Occasionally, they hurled insults at Brown. The prosecutor, Charles Harding, fell asleep at his table and had no obvious problem with alcohol. On the second day of the trial, Judge Andrew Parker replaced him with a new prosecutor. The testimony against Brown mounted, and at one point he declared that he was not getting a fair trial and that persons whom he had hoped would testify on his behalf had not been served with subpoenas. He asked for a continuance so that he could get more reliable defense attorneys. This caused his 3 attorneys to drop the case. The judge granted Brown 1 day to secure new counsel. It was to no avail. It took the jury only 45 minutes to return with a verdict of guilty. Brown was sentenced on November 2nd. He delivered a short speech that Ralph Waldo Emerson termed one of the greatest of all American speeches. Rising up from his cot, Brown said, "The New Testament teaches me that all things whatsoever I would that man should do to me, I should do even so to them. I have endeavored to act on that instruction. I am yet too young to understand that God is any respecter of persons. I believe that to have interfered, as I have done, in behalf of his despised poor is no wrong but right. Now, if it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice and mingle my blood farther with the blood of my children and the blood of millions in this slave country whose rights are disregarded by wicked, cruel, and unjust enactments, I say, let it be done. Parker sentenced Brown to die by public hanging on December 2nd. Now Brown calmly accepted his fate, and as he awaited execution, discouraged others from plotting to raise him from jail, to spring him from jail. He granted newspaper interviews and wrote letters advocating abolition. A scaffold with a trapdoor was constructed on a field near the courthouse. Now on December 1st, his wife, Mary Day Brown, met with him, and he told her his death was for the best. The next day, Brown was taken by wagon to the scaffold. As a precaution against a last-minute attempt by supporters to free Brown, Major General Robert E. Lee had soldiers stationed everywhere in town, at bridges, the jail, the route to the execution site, and the scaffold. No outsiders except journalists were allowed into town. Once he fell through the trapdoor, Brown was dead within about 5 minutes. One of the witnesses of his execution was a volunteer soldier who considered Brown a despicable traitor. John Wilkes Booth, who would later assassinate President Abraham Lincoln. Brown's body was taken back to his family farm in North Elba, New York, for burial. Brown's fellow raiders were tried in the courthouse and met with the same fate. 4 men were executed in 1859 and 2 in 1860. Although the courthouse has haunting activity, John Brown's ghost is not believed to linger at the scene of his trial. Instead, the phenomena probably have built up over the years of many trials and include phantom voices, whispers, and murmuring. People have also sensed presences and sometimes described the atmosphere as suddenly oppressive. Some of the haunting activity may be related to the slave trade that took place at that location before John Brown's trial. According to Ann Keel Fern in Charlestown, West Virginia, A Haunted History, slaves were sold here, and the haunting phenomena that linger include the sounds of chains and shackles, the rustling of clothing, and cries of anguish. A ghostly figure of a black man in chains has been seen. 2 slaves who were punished for usurping authority had their hands burned, and some people say they have detected the smell. All right, you guys, this one here is called the Old Jail Site. Now, the jail where John Brown and his men were incarcerated was diagonally across the street from the courthouse. The jail was destroyed during the Civil War and rebuilt in 1873. That structure was torn down in 1919 to make way for a post office. Now, the jail was moved to a new location, but it seems that the ghosts associated with the jail have not departed. Prior to Brown's trial, the jail held many slaves who were sentenced to prison for various crimes and infractions, including vague transgressions such as outrage committed. Some were hanged on the site. The others died in their cells. Their phantom screams and moans are still heard. Now, one ghost of note is associated with a murderer named Harry Smoots, who may have been mentally impaired. Now, Smoots became obsessed with a young woman, Susie Cameron Farrell of Shepherdstown. Farrell rejected him, and one night on January 1892, he shot her to death through the head at point-blank range. Jailed in Charlestown, Smoots pleaded insanity but was convinced of first-degree murder and sentenced to die by hanging. Now, Smoots took matters into his own hands and had his visitors smuggle in morphine pills, which he hid in his thick hair. When he had acquired enough, he overdosed and died in his cell. His ghost, which still runs its fingers through its hair, is seen at night. Another notable ghost at the old jail site is that of a freed slave, Andrew Scott, who was convicted of murdering his wife by arsenic poisoning in 1895 and was hanged. All right, y'all, this one here is called Gibson Perkins House. Now, the field where John Brown was executed by hanging is now private property, part of the yard of the Perkins House, which is not open to the public. A historical marker erected in 1932 notes the execution site. According to lore, the house is haunted and some say that Brown's ghost is there. The red brick Victorian house was built in 1892 by Colonel William Gibson, whose sympathies were firmly with the South. He even seemed to celebrate the execution site, handing out postcards with the scaffold location marked by a cross. Curiously, Gibson had the deed to his property written with every paragraph starting with the Lord's Prayer. Might this have been an attempt to protect himself? Some say that Brown's ghost, who also haunts Harper's Ferry, appears in an upper story window at sunset, reenacting his final moments as he hung in the noose. Another male ghost has been seen upstairs, possibly a member of the Gibson family or someone who died in the Civil War fighting in the area. Other phenomena include mysterious noises, locked doors opening, objects being moved about, phantom voices calling out names, and odd flickering lights in what was once the servants' quarters upstairs. The lights have been associated with John Wilkes Booth, who knew Gibson. One legend holds that Booth was not executed, but managed to escape and hide out at Gibson's home. The property, purchased in 1987 by the Perkins family, sits on top of an old former underground passage that connected to the Lakeland Underground Cavern beneath the town. An entertainment site with a large pond and beach. Interestingly, the cavern also connects to the old Opera House, another haunted location. Now, all right, this one here is Zion Episcopal Church and Cemetery. Now, the Zion Episcopal Church and its small, stately cemetery are probably the most active ghost site in Charlestown. The cemetery dates to the 1700s and the church to the early 1800s. Now, the cemetery is famous for the more than 70 descendants of President George Washington who are buried there, including his brother Samuel. Now, the Washingtons are said to be restless spirits on the Zion grounds, prowling about at night. Founding Father Charles Washington, George's youngest brother, is not among them, however. He and his wife Mildred lie in repose in the private family plot at their estate Happy Retreat, which is now a historic property. Now, the most often seen ghost in Charlestown is buried in Zion, but is not a Washington. She is Mary Allibone, the sister of George Turner, a well-respected farmer and merchant who was a classmate of Robert E. Lee at West Point. Turner rode to Harper's Ferry on business on October 17, 1859, not knowing that the city was under attack by John Brown's raiders. When he arrived and saw the fighting, he got a musket and prepared to shoot at the raiders. A stray bullet caught him in the shoulder and then the jugular vein, killing him instantly. When Turner's body was returned to his home in Charlestown, Mary collapsed in grief and agony. Long after he was buried in the Zion Cemetery, Mary continued to wear black and remain in deep mourning. She lost her will to live and died. She was buried alongside her beloved brother. Her ghost wanders the cemetery, still dressed in black, and sobs out the name of her brother. Another restless Zion ghost is John Yates Beale, an engineer credited with building the cemetery wall. Now, Beale was 26 when the Civil War broke out and he joined the Virginia Infantry. Soon, he was seriously wounded with a gunshot to the lung and was forced to leave active duty. He became a privateer and worked to aid Confederate troops. He was arrested and released, and then joined a group of volunteers who plotted to derail a train carrying Confederate officers who had been captured. Beale and another man, George S. Anderson, were arrested and charged with treason. Anderson testified against Beale and was released. Beale was convicted. Efforts to intervene on his behalf failed, and Beale was executed by hanging on February 25, 1865, in New York. His body was returned to Charlestown for burial in Zion. Now, Beale's ghost has been seen near his gravesite, wearing a suit and bow tie. He has a mustache and goatee. His head, however, is not on straight, but lies to one side or another, to one side on a shoulder. Now the church is also said to be haunted. The present structure is the third on the site. The first church, built in 1818, burned and was replaced in 1846. 2 years later, the second church burned, and it was rebuilt in 1851. The basement still has the original foundation, and haunting activity takes place at this lower level. During the Civil War, residents of Charlestown hid their valuables in the basement to prevent their seizure by Union troops. Haunting phenomena include the sounds of a choir singing to music and heavy footsteps on the level above. All right, y'all, this one here is called The Ghost of William Bailey. Now, a terrible train accident apparently has left unhappy ghosts at a railroad crossing near the Blessing House, the first stone house built by a freed slave in Jefferson County in the late 1820s. Now, the freed man was a cook for John Brown during his trial in 1859. Now, on September 24th, 1924, William Bailey was 40, was out on the train tracks at 4:30 a.m. for reasons unknown. A fast-moving train came through. The conductor blew the horn, but Bailey did not budge, also for reasons unknown. He was struck by the cowcatcher and was dragged 600 feet, screaming all the way, his body shredding beneath the train. It is said that every anniversary since, the ghosts of Bailey and the conductor reenact the accident. Residents in the area report awakening to screams and train horn blasts at 4:30 a.m. Bailey is buried in the haunted Edge Hill Cemetery alongside his wife, Lacey, but his ghost seems to be tied to the scene of his gruesome death. All right, this here's Edge Hill Cemetery. So many Civil War soldiers from South Carolina are buried in Edge Hill Cemetery that it is known as the Confederate Cemetery. The graveyard and the surrounding area are well known for their ghosts. The most famous ghost is that of Fontaine Beckham, a portly man who was the mayor and train station manager of Harper's Ferry at the time of John Brown's raid. One of his employees was Hayward Shepard, a freed black man who worked as a porter. Now, Shepard was the first man to be killed during the raid, and Beckham was quite upset. When the raiders holed up in the engine house, the 64-year-old Beckham could not resist spying on them from behind the water tower. One of Brown's men shot him in the forehead, and he was killed instantly. Beckham's impressive grave is frequented by his ghost, who reportedly looks as he did when he died. Near where Beckham is buried, residents and visitors often hear phantom sounds of children laughing and running late at night. The sounds are associated with the many children buried in Edge Hill who died during diphtheria and influenza epidemics from 1856 to 1859, and then again in 1916. The road that leads from the Carriage Inn bed and breakfast to the cemetery is haunted by the ghost of a Confederate soldier who makes his way slowly along the street. Sometimes the soldier is a full-bodied ghost, and other times only his torso and head are seen. When he reaches the cemetery, he fades away. Another restless ghost linked to the cemetery is that of Captain Keels of South Carolina, who is said to walk about trying to get his fallen men back home. All right, y'all, this one here is the Washington House Inn. Now, Washington House Inn is a spectacular, turreted Victorian home built in 1899 by descendants of two of President George Washington's brothers, Samuel and John Augustine. Located at 216 South George Street, it is a bed and breakfast establishment that apparently hosts some otherworldly guests. Now, visitors have reported feeling presences in one of the bedrooms. A ghostly figure with a lit candle has appeared in the top window of the turret, where it pulls a curtain and then vanishes. Now, one of the rocking chairs on the veranda sometimes rocks all by itself. All right, this one here is called the Old Opera House. Theaters and music halls are among the most haunted of all buildings, perhaps because of the intense emotions generated night after night by both performers and audiences. Now, the Old Opera House at 204 North George Street is no exception and has a number of resident ghosts. The Opera House was built in 1910 and held its first performance the following year for an audience of about 500. It was in operation until 1948. Now, supposedly, a speakeasy operated out of the basement during Prohibition. After the opera business closed, the building went through various incarnations as an apartment house, florist shop, movie theater, tavern, and even a bowling alley. Now, at one time, it had an underground entrance to the old Lakeland Cavern, a subterranean pond. It has since been restored to a performing arts theater and is known as the New Opera House. The Opera House and the Old Opera House. Now, haunting phenomena in the past have included lights going on and off, poltergeist effects, objects being moved around and broken, sounds such as footsteps and voices, and full-bodied apparitions. Now, the best-known ghost is a woman in white, whose clothing is old-fashioned. No one knows her identity, but she is believed to have been a patron in the early days and still likes to watch the shows. She is seen sitting in the front of the theater and also walking across the lobby. She has even spoken to staff members who work there at night after hours. Another ghost is said to be that of an evil man who, according to lore, died of smoke inhalation during a fire when the building was an apartment house. Perhaps he is not so much evil as unhappy over his death. His bearded ghost pesters employees, pushes them, and is blamed for feelings of dread and oppression on the stage and in the basement. Now, employees sometimes feel watched and smell vile odors. A mirror that suddenly shattered in the dressing room was attributed to this ghost. Now, the sounds of ice tinkling in glasses in a dressing room also have been captured during paranormal investigations. The balcony in the side of another often seen ghost, a little boy who is said to have fallen over the balcony and died. The sounds of wooden furniture being pulled across the balcony floor are heard, despite the absence of wooden chairs for many years now. Lights suddenly go off and on. The balcony also is the site of two invisible men arguing, a disagreement that may have originally taken place many years ago. All right, y'all, this and here's Patty's Irish Pub. The brick restaurant at 210 West Liberty Street, currently known as Patty's Irish Pub, has had various incarnations and names since it was built in 1787 as a private residence. The people and businesses have changed over the years, but the ghosts remain on the premises. The first occupants were Dr. Edward Tiffin and his family, who were among the first residents to have a home in Charlestown, founded only the year before. After the house passed out of Tiffin hands, it became the Charles Washington Inn, named after the town's founding father and the youngest brother of George Washington. Now, during its days as the inn, the place became known as the haunt of Miss Emily, the ghost of a 13-year-old girl with a fondness for slamming doors, opening locks, upsetting bud vases on the dining tables, and causing other poltergeist sorts of mishaps. Now, Miss Emily also played in the kitchen and liked to turn the dining room lights on and off. More banging noises and push people. A child's handprint on a window pane resisted cleaning. The ghosts sometimes communicated with staff and visitors by dimming lights in response to questions. No one knew who or what was behind the mischief until a psychic was brought in and identified her, adding that she had died in the pink room upstairs. No historical evidence has been uncovered to validate the story and further identify the girl. However, now paranormal researchers Walt Govenda and Michael T. Shoemaker took a photograph of the house when it was closed and captured a mysterious white figure in an upstairs window, perhaps Miss Emily. Now, the inn closed and became C.W. Tiffin's, an eating establishment named in part after Edward Tiffin, the initials stand for Charles Washington. Now, that closed in 2009 and the property sat vacant for a while. Former employees told ghost tour guide Ann Keel Fern that an often seen figure was the shadowy form of a woman in long skirts. She slowly went up the spiral staircase but never reached the top. This figure was associated with some of the poltergeist activity, which included the throwing of plates, glasses, and cutlery against the walls. Now, in 2012, the building was reopened as Patty's Irish Pub. Other ghost stories told about the property are of Hussein soldiers who fought for the crown during the American Revolutionary War. The spirits of the soldiers and some of their victims apparently remain as restless presences near the house. Now, ghost hunters who have held all-night investigations on the property in the past have experienced strange noises, mysterious footsteps, and EVPs of unknown voices. All right, this one here is Shepherdstown and environs. Now, visiting Shepherdstown is like stepping back in time to the beginnings of America. The town was chartered in 1762, making it one of two oldest towns in the state, along with Romney, which was chartered the same year. Now, Revolutionary War era buildings still stand here. Shepherdstown is in Jefferson County and is located on the Potomac River on the border with Maryland, close to the heavily haunted town of Harper's Ferry. It is also near Antietam, Maryland, where the bloodiest battle of the Civil War was fought. Now, let's talk about the history. The town, first known as Potomac, was eventually named after its founding father, Thomas Shepherd, who was granted 222 acres there in 1734. He plotted out the town on 50 acres of his land and named it Mecklenburg. Now, Shepherd was the sole owner of the town until 1792, when the Commonwealth of Virginia granted it a charter for self-governance. Now, in 1798, the name was changed to Shepherdstown, which was shortened to Shepherdstown after the Civil War. With an advantageous location on the Potomac and the benefits of 6 natural springs, Shepherdstown attracted a variety of trades and businesses, and the town prospered. The water and clay soil were ideal for brick making, which became a major industry. Now, no major battle in the Revolutionary War was fought here, but troops passed through, and 38 veterans of the war were buried in the area. Military activity increased in the buildup of the Civil War. Light infantry troops from the town were sent to Harper's Ferry to help quell the John Brown raid. After the outbreak of the war, the troops became Company B in the 2nd Virginia Infantry, also known as Stonewall's Brigade. Now, the Battle of Antietam was fought on September 17, 1862, and Shepherdstown was overwhelmed with 5,000 to 8,000 casualties. The wounded and dying were stacked everywhere, in every building, house, and street. During General Robert E. Lee's retreat, the Battle of Shepherdstown was fought a few days later on September 20th, adding to the burden of casualties. More than 100 Confederate soldiers died and were buried in Elmwood Cemetery, which eventually became the resting place for more than 200 Confederate men. The Civil War severely damaged the courthouse in the county seat of Charlestown, and from 1865 to 1871, the seat was temporarily transferred to the Shepherdstown Town Hall. In 1872, the town hall was leased to the state of West Virginia, becoming the birthplace of Shepherd College. Now, the college became a university in 2004. Since in 1987, the entire town has officially been on the National Register of Historic Places. The buildings in the Central Historic District are well preserved.